Welcome to Free Your Children TV. I am your host, Tiffany Boyd, and our mission here at Free Your Children is to share the truth in love about education. There's a battle raging for the souls of our nation's children, and I hope this ministry and this TV show will equip you for battle. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of His might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the devil. Ephesians 6:10 through 11. I hope this ministry does exactly what we are intending to do, which is to give you what you need to fight for your parental rights, your educational rights, and for your constitutional rights. I am very thrilled to have Connie Reguli with us again today on this segment. We had to continue our segment because we had so much to talk about. We wanted to discuss specifically in this show some legislation that's flowing through our legislature, that's a mouthful, right here in Tennessee. Connie and I have been down at Cordell Hall many days this legislative session, and we have sat through many committees. I know that you have testified. I've testified. I've actually been denied the right to testify in a couple of committees during this session. And I wanted to highlight specifically some bills that we have that we're concerned about. One being the at-risk boarding charter facility bill that's been moving through. We spoke about this in a previous show that we did. We battled it last year. It had a different bill number. We wound up, and I don't want to say defeating the bill because we knew it wasn't defeated. It was kind of just put up on a shelf. Yeah. And we felt like it would come back, and it did, and you happened to discover, almost by accident, didn't you?
I mean, we really thought 1214 died. We really did think, okay, it's dead. It's gone away, it's dead. And actually, as the bills come up, people need to sort of understand, here's what happens. In January, it's like watching some kind of auction or something. You have the index board, right? And you just start seeing these bills pop up on the index board, and you have to open them and you have to read them. And I was with several kind of legislative groups where we were trying to track certain things that we had an interest in. And so, of course, I was watching anything that was family, children, health, about children, et cetera.
Right.
And so some of these bills come up and they're called a caption bill. And so a caption bill may have two sentences in it. And it may say that the schools shall register the allergies of the children, right? And you see it and you go like, okay, well, whatever.
Yeah, it's just a platonic, bill.
I mean, you're a little bit concerned because of the health care and all that, but you just, and as much as you can, and then, of course, we start start chatting, and we're like, watch for this, watch for this, watch for this, and watch for education, and watch for this.
Right.
And so one day, I hadn't seen anything related to the boarding schools. And one day I went to a rally that they had, and it was about 1 o'clock. It was a beautiful day. After the rally was over, about 2 o'clock, 2:30, I had a little bit of time. I didn't have to scoot out of town. It wasn't quite rush hour. I wasn't in a hurry. And I was like, I'm just going to go down. I'm just going to see what's going on. And so I went back down. It was fairly empty because nobody expected anything to be coming up.
Right.
And so I went in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I just sat down, and I'm listening. And I mean, it must have been a God thing because, like the second bill that came up, I saw the senator stand up and start talking about the boarding schools for at-risk children. And I mean, I'm looking, I'm like, what was that bill number?
Yeah, and this was the one where the caption said it specifically spoke about reporting children's allergies.
Right.
It had nothing to do with an at-risk boarding charter facility, but this was an amendment attached to it, right? Like 275 pages or something?
Well, no, it wasn't that long. It's this one's about 13 pages or something that's attached to it.
Okay.
But, it is, and learning how to do this is very interesting, right? Because you have the website, and everybody goes like, oh, well, the website's fairly user-friendly. Right? Because you can put the bill number in, and a little bill pops up, and you can click on it, and then the actual PDF file shows up there, right? But then that's not what they're voting on at all.
Exactly. Yes.
And so you have to have the dashboard, which is a secret little place on the website, and you have to have a secret code.
Yes, to get in. And then you have to hope that they send you the verifying email so you can even access it.
And then you get in there and it's totally different format.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have amendments. Mm-hmm. And so they can put those amendments on a day before.
Right.
And so if you've checked the calendar or the agenda the week before on Wednesday or Thursday, and you go, okay, this bill's going to come up, and then you go in there and you prepare your little speech. And they did this to me on purpose, I'm sure, one year. You prepare your little speech based upon what you're reading, and then you go in there and they're like, we have an amendment and this amendment. Can you explain the amendment? And, and I had one a couple years ago where DCS was going to be allowed to hire guardian ad litems just to file termination of parental rights. And I had my speech all prepared that was a conflict of interest, blah, 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 blah. And they get up there, well, we have an amendment and we have changed this. And I sat down and I'm like, well, I just need to change my whole speech now.
Right, yeah. And I think another thing that really kind of unnerves people when you register to testify, or request is a better way to phrase that, because they don't have to apparently allow you to testify, because they have denied numerous people the right to testify in opposition to specific bills because they were affiliated with Free Your Children and they weren't given the right to do so. Once you give your testimony, they then can ask you questions.
Yes.
And I think for a lot of people, that's what, because, we were trying to generate interest and encourage people to do that, and they weren't so concerned with the fact that they were going to get up there and give a 3-minute statement, but it was almost the fear of what they were going to ask them and if they were going to essentially interrogate them and try to put them on the spot. And I will just be honest with you, I felt like there was an attempt, this is my opinion, to intimidate me when I gave my testimony in the Senate, but I knew what to expect. So it wasn't any big deal for me because I knew exactly what I was going to say if that occurred. But for a lot of people, it is very unnerving and a scary thing.
Yeah, so when you and I go to speak, it's different than a lot of people speaking. So I want them to, I'm like putting it out there just to dare them to ask me a question.
Exactly, yes, I get it.
But, when I take people up there to testify, I help them prepare their story. So on particular things like termination of parental rights, where it wasn't fair, it was unjust, or this particular law is going to affect them, or they had, or it did affect them in the past, I help them prepare their story on what happened to them and how it affected them. This year I actually took 3 kids to testify.
That's great.
And all 3 had been involved with the DCS process several years before, and they had really strong parents who had helped them kind of get back and get strong enough to be able to tell their story publicly, because it's pretty embarrassing actually. It's like it's like the Scarlet Letter, right? And so, and they did amazing.
That's fantastic.
I'm so proud of them. But when I get up there, I'm basically daring them to ask me a question. And I have had a couple questions, and they're a little sneering because I'm there to basically challenge, because I never go in support of
Well, I didn't see a whole lot I would want to support this legislative session.
Which is a whole nother conversation you and I should have about what we want to propose.
And
I want to be proactive for next year, and I already have a list of 30 bills that I want.
That's amazing. That's
great. We
great.
need to have a workshop on that as soon as this session's over.
Yes, the work is never done, and they never stop, just so you know. So you don't think for a moment that you can turn your back on what's going on. And, I've said before, the reason why we've spent so much time there this legislative session is because we don't trust them. And the reason why we don't trust them is because they have consistently lied to us. And when that becomes a pattern, then you know that clearly we need to be more engaged. And I'm a firm believer that we need to even have a stronger presence there. We can tell that it kind of throws them off when we go in our orange shirts, holding our
hold up signs that say no.
Yes, holding our orange, bright orange signs, our construction, warning, caution signs. But they need to see that, because it doesn't happen not nearly often enough. So I always encourage parents, come and join, sign up to speak. And I say the same thing too, get on the agenda to testify. You're not a target like I am,
Right.
you know, not necessarily as much as those of us who have become, you know, publicly their adversaries, so to speak, just because we don't agree with,
Right.
you know, what they're doing or legislation that they're, you know, trying to bring forward that we feel like is usurping, you know, our rights.
And by the way, we want to warn y'all, next year, here's what we're going to do. We are going to take blank boards and we're going to take markers. And when people get up and lie,
Yes.
we're going to write liar and
hold it up. That's exactly right. Connie and I spent, oh gosh, hours and hours this week sitting right beside one another, listening to this circus. And as they were discussing legislation, she would look at me and I would look at her and we would be like, they're lying.
Yeah.
Like, that is just a blatant, you know, lie.
On bills we didn't even care about.
Yes, yeah, these were bills that, you know, we didn't, it wasn't impacting us, so we weren't even up to speed, but we had sat through so many committees at that point. We had heard them say one thing in one committee, and then we would go into another committee, and they would say something totally different. So there's a definite problem with truth and transparency, in my opinion, at the legislature, and you cannot turn your back. And, and a lot of things are peddled, and I've spoken about this in other shows, and I'm going to bring it up again in this show now with you, is the fact that just because a bill is being painted in a certain light doesn't necessarily mean that that's what it is. So don't ever take someone's word that a particular bill has a particular motive. And I'm building up to something that I want to discuss here. You know exactly where I'm going with this. One of these particular bills was the parental rights bill that Representative Faison was sponsoring this legislative session. And the conservatives were all whipped up into a tizzy about this. It was supposed to be this wonderful bill that was going to protect parents in Tennessee, and we had to have this, and it was so important. I spoke to the lobbyists that were there for Alliance Defending Freedom in one of the break rooms on one of the many days that we were there. And you know, I already knew it was a problem, and you and I had discussed it, and I had read other bills that were along the same vein, because there were several parental rights bills at the beginning of the legislative session. I wrote about one because I'm a monthly contributor to a local publication, and I had covered it. And I had said, any government large enough to enumerate parental rights is a government large enough to take those rights away. You do not want our Tennessee state legislature to start telling you what your parental rights are. That is a big red flag right there. So I was concerned with that. And then this one popped up, and conservatives and conservative groups, they were peddling this particular bill and saying you should support it. Just because a bill is being carried or sponsored by someone with an R, that doesn't mean it's a good bill. Just like if a bill is being sponsored by someone with a D behind their name, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad bill. What you have to learn to do is actually read the bill. And so this bill had some very concerning language in it. Connie wrote about it. She called me about it. She asked me to get the word out. I did that. I did numerous lives warning about this. Explain.
Okay.
To our listeners why this is what we coined the fake parental rights bill.
Yeah. So first of all, under the United States Constitution, the 14th Amendment, we already have parental rights.
Yeah, exactly.
And those parental rights, over the years, attorneys all over this country have worked so hard to carve those out. Parental rights for education, for decision making, for protecting your children from CPS. I mean, attorneys who do civil rights cases are warriors, because it is so hard and you don't get paid for them, and you have to carve out our rights one at a time. So we've worked really hard. And over the past 50 years, we have established a lot of parental rights, just one at a time, you know? And so I'm going to give a really good example, because again, DCS, CPS, they love to interrogate children, and they love to interrogate children without parental consent.
Which is happening in Tennessee, by the way. It's on the website. The Tennessee .gov website gives schools the authority to interrogate children without parental consent.
Right. But the truth is they're not supposed to be doing that.
Of course not.
And so, we worked really hard, and I have some of those civil rights cases up there that says the Fourth Amendment applies to social workers just like it does to the police. And we finally carved out that they cannot interrogate children in the home unless they have articulable probable cause, of abuse. And so it took until, it was just not that long ago, like 2015 or 16, we finally carved out, we do have the civil right to protect our children from being interrogated in the schools. But they still believe they can do it. So when we got the parental rights bill, and, I started, first of all, it says you have a list of enumerated rights unless. Right. Unless. And one of those unlesses is if you have the right to consent to your child be interrogated unless it is a DCS investigation or a law enforcement interaction.
Right, which would be an SRO officer, potentially a school resource officer in the school.
And it didn't even say investigation.
Right.
It just said interaction. So anybody could stop your child and talk to them. And that was one of the big unlesses. And when I saw that, of course, I kept reading. But
And let me just say this. If a child, because I have had several of those families that I have put you in contact with, contact me first.
Right.
And what has happened is, on an allegation, their child has been hauled into the principal's office. They've then called in the SRO officer. They've then contacted a social worker within the school because this child has been accused of X, Y, and Z. Okay, and so often, and these are young children. This is happening in elementary school.
Right.
So let's clarify that. So think about this: an elementary school child is hauled into an office with an officer. How many children do you know that are really going to be able to stand up to an interrogation? Especially if they could be potentially being told, you have to cooperate. And I've heard this. I've heard parents tell me that their children were told, you're not going to get to see your mom and dad again.
They did say that.
They manipulate them. I have heard oftentimes they get children to admit to things that they didn't do just because they're afraid that they're not going to be able to go home with mom or dad or whoever their parent may be or their guardian may be. Then if the child admits and then they just something, that they did something to make this go away because they think that if they tell them what they want to hear, that it will get better and they'll get to go back to class or they'll get to go home or whatever. Then they get entered into the DCS pipeline. They're hauled off to DCS. They're held for 72 hours, sometimes in solitary confinement. The parents aren't even notified sometimes until after this has occurred. They don't know where their child is. I cannot begin to imagine the horror. A parent, and I had a parent tell me this experience happened to them. By the time they got to school, their child was gone. They had no idea where their child was. They had already been entered into the system. It was over the weekend. They didn't get them back until Monday. Are you seeing this becoming a pattern?
Oh, yeah. And let me flip it the other way, because I know a story about a young child who was in second grade who was assaulted at school by a student. And they used an interrogation on that child because she had told her parents that what had happened at school. They called her into the principal's office and interrogated her until she changed her story to for the innocence of the school. So yes, and over the years ago, I had a family that the child was interrogated and said, you may not see your family again if you don't tell me this or this or this.
Right.
So it's absolutely terrible. So another thing about the parental rights bill is it had a blanket consent in there.
Yes.
And so, as a lawyer, I'm like, oh, this is going to be the out for everybody, right? This is going to be, because the big thing was that now you'll be able to sue if somebody violates your parental rights. And so they put this blanket consent in there, and I'm like, look, every attorney, when this passes, when this becomes effective July 1st, every single activity for children, whether it's a doctor, a school, a church, a bounce house, when you sign that little electronic signature that you've never even read what's in there, it's going to have a blanket consent in there that you waive any liability for anything that happens to your child, even if they kill him.
Right. I mean, how horrifying. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so blanket consent, and I worked with a couple of ladies who were lobbying that are involved more with children's health defense. And of course, they were just flabbergasted about that because, I mean, you could take your child to the psychologist, you know, for, you know, having anxiety, and the next thing you know, they're gender dysphoria, right? So the blanket consent was a big concern. The fact that they called a parent, they defined a parent as a biological, legal, or adoptive parent, or a person who's been given decision-making authority by a government agency. I'm like, what is that?
So any entity, essentially, that they
Except
give.
I think they used the word individual. It was very odd. They said an individual who's been given decision-making authority. So I'm like, you know, this is really weird. I don't know where that came from. And so actually I tried when I went and I spoke at one of the meetings, I thought, I'm just going to be very technical with them, and I'm just going to see if I get a response. So I said to them, I says, you should not say that it is a biological, legal, or adoptive parent. I says, first of all, an adoptive parent is a legal parent, so you need to strike that. Second of all, a biological parent is not always a legal parent.
Right.
Because in Tennessee, if you have a child out of wedlock, you're not a legal parent. I said, so to put that in there is contrary to law that's already on the books and redundant. So you should change that. Just to see if I would get an intelligent question out of that. Nothing.
Nothing. Nothing. So have they made any amendments to the bill to make it any better, or
no,
I'm not certain that there's any way to make this good at all.
So here's what happened. Here's the history. So the Children and Family Affairs is the subcommittee, and then that goes to the Civil Justice Committee and then to the floor.
Right.
And so what happened the first time it appeared in the subcommittee, I went and I spoke, and then the ADF guy spoke.
Oh, yeah.
And he's
let's stop right there, because you're like me, and we've done this so much that we can throw around acronyms the way we can, you know, juggle all the things that we have to do on a regular basis. Who is ADF?
Okay, so ADF is Alliance Defending Freedom.
Yes. Okay.
Well, there's two. There's Alliance Defending Freedom, and there's ADF Foundation, and they're sisters, and they come out of Scottsdale, Arizona, and I say nothing good comes out of Maricopa County. And so, sure enough, they are ADF, or Alliance Defending Freedom. It's a huge nonprofit organization, but it's basically a predatory law firm.
Yeah.
It is a law firm. They brag that they associate with 4,500 different attorneys. A large part of their incomes comes from attorneys' fees. They pride themselves in being the legal counsel for I call it the cake case out of Colorado, where the cake baker refused to bake the cake for the gay couple.
Yes.
And so they have it on their website, and they're very proud of that.
Yeah.
But, you know, they want this bill because it creates a cause of action.
Right.
So the first ADF representative came in, and he spoke at the subcommittee, and he was asked the question. They put me on first. They asked me no questions. They put Mr. ADF on, and they asked him all kinds of questions.
I'm sure.
After his 3 minutes was expired. But they asked him this. They said, so, has similar legislation passed in other states? And he goes, oh, yes. 17 other states have passed substantially similar legislation. And I'm going, liar, liar, pants on fire, you know? And I always sit on the front row, and I'm like, you know, they can see my facial expressions.
Right.
And so I immediately went, I did my homework. I pulled all the family rights legislation from all the states, and of course, none of them are substantially similar.
Yeah.
None of them have the cause of action that we have in Tennessee. None of them have blanket consent. None of them.
Yeah.
And so, you know, a few of them had a couple of exceptions, but none of them had the unless. So he came back again, second time in subcommittee. He pulled it, rolled it. We went through subcommittee, civil justice. So the second time is when I had the 3 kids go speak. They brought in their big guns from Washington, D.C. to speak on it. And then I went to civil justice committee. And the civil justice committee, again, ADF had, so they brought in 3 different people to speak on it. And I spoke again in the civil justice committee, along with my 2 other cohorts that speak on children's health defense.
Right.
And it passed through civil justice committee, and then it went to the House floor. And honestly, it was on the floor calendar for last Thursday.
Yes.
I don't know when this will play, but on April 11th for everybody. And so April 11th, I was watching it live because I had something else to do. I couldn't get there that morning.
Right.
I'm just like this, you know. I'm just like sitting like this, and it gets to the bill, and he puts it on the House desk, which means they didn't vote on it.
Right. Yeah, and it's still sitting there as far as we know.
And so I tracked all over the place. What does that mean? I got them, I pulled up all the rules. It's not in the rules. So I went to the clerk's office. I'm like, what does it mean? I called his office. What does it mean? What's going to happen? And they said, well, it's just on the desk. And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, what does that mean?
Right.
I'm like, what does it take to get it off the desk?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And they said, he just needs to make a motion.
I was going to say, when it goes back to the House floor, and by the way, this upcoming Monday, they're having another House floor session, which means it could potentially resurface there, right?
Right.
Yeah. Now, I know you've done a hard campaign push on trying to educate representatives, legislators, families, why this is bad, why they shouldn't be voting in favor of this piece of legislation, why we should be contacting our elected representatives and telling them to vote no, you know, if it does find its way back on the floor. I've done the same. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I don't know, but I would ask people to still do it. And the one thing that I did do some amendments. I've talked to people, I passed things around. I did prepare an email that had really just kind of pointed out specific things. And I picked, I don't know, I think I picked 35 different legislators that at least would not recognize my name, that maybe, because some of them I haven't talked to at all.
Right.
And I pushed that out there, right before the vote as well. So,
Right.
It is so easy to email a legislator.
Yeah.
If you go on that website and you go to members and if you don't even know who your legislator is, they have a Find Your Legislator
Right.
tab,
Yes,
you guys.
they do, yep.
And so you can just click on the thing. It's got a little click button to email your legislator.
Right.
And, if you have a message, you want to, best to copy and paste. So you type up your little message, you copy it, you go click on the email, and you paste it in there. And always in the subject, put vote no and put the bill number.
Yeah.
And so that's the best protocol to do. They don't read them all, but if in the subject you have vote no and the bill number, at least the aides will pull them up and, let the representative know.
Right.
So we should still be just pushing those emails out there, vote no, and, just try to make an impact on them. We are the people.
Yes, absolutely. And we have to exercise our voice and we have to participate in the process. And, this legislative session, there have been 3 bills that have been working in tandem with one another. It's the at-risk boarding charters, which we are opposed to, the school choice legislation that we are opposed to, and this parental rights bill that we are opposed to. So don't stop. Keep the pressure up. Even if some of these things get defeated this year, we expect to see them resurface, maybe as different bills next year or maybe embedded in certain things. Our legislature, as of the taping of this show, is still in session.
Right.
So we don't know how things are going to turn out yet, but we are still definitely working to fight for parental rights, for educational rights, and constitutional rights, and we urge you to do the same thing. We are the people. We do have a voice. Real grassroots do work. If you have questions, if you need help, if you want more information, you can find me at freeyourchildren.com. Remember, we love you here at Free Your Children, and we want to see you equipped, encouraged, and empowered. Good night, and see you back next time.